I'm from the Center for New Media Teaching and Learning. I head up the service group. That means that I help faculty members with blogs, wikis, courseworks, other types of tools that are available in the .com sphere, and just sort of help faculty members teach better with technology.
And I work at the School of Continuing Education, overseeing the design and delivery of our expanding suite of online and hybrid courses. I work with teams of media production specialists, technology specialists, and design specialists. We're trying to solve the wicked design problem right at the intersection of all three of those.
And we're going to do this sort of back and forth thing. Good cop, bad cop for the presentation.
I'm the good one.
She's the good one, exactly. We kicked around a couple of titles for this session. We talked about course corrections being the title. We talked about is the unexamined course worth teaching title with a nod to Plato, who's inscribed over the door that I walk through every day over at Butler Library. And the most important part, though, is what faculty can learn from their students. We really want to focus on that during this session today. And these are the issues and topics that we want to talk about during this session. And this will take us through to what, about 4:15, 5 o'clock? Okay. And we realize that talking about curriculum, talking about outcomes, right? Talking about the assignments or assessments that you ask students to do, looking at direct student feedback and getting survey results and things from students is really important. Looking at rubrics or guidelines about the content and the things that you deliver to students. Looking at the work that the students do, and then using all of these data to inflect and change your teaching is really an epic thing to talk about today. So we're going to focus on these three elements in the middle.
Yeah, because clearly we can't talk about everything, but what we can talk about is what students do in the course, how you design activities to allow students to evidence their progress towards the sets of knowledge or skills or the values or habits of mind that you want them to walk away from your course with and perhaps remember next semester, a year down the line, 5 years down the line, or 20 years down the line. And so we'll talk specifically about the design of assignments that help you to kind of that help students to evidence that progress. We'll talk a little bit about how you can solicit direct feedback from faculty, from your students, to give you information about how well your course is working, and then we'll talk about how emerging technology platforms are now starting to expose the data that users expose the learning analytics or data that show student performance.
And another thing, when we were looking at this, Lisa really struck on an important theme, and that is paying attention. Really sort of being purposeful about examining and paying attention to what your students are doing in the classroom. And Lori Burris this morning mentioned the exact same thing. So sort of tying in with what she had to say about all of the ways that students learn and the way that she wants to teach. That paying close attention to students and faculty is really important. John Coatsworth mentioned the exact same thing as well. So I think we're hitting on some of the themes that folks brought up earlier in the day. So I think that everyone in this room knows what this is. This is sort of a way of visualizing the course of a course across the semester. We've got all these little sort of weekly assignments that are maybe worth 5% of the grade, and then these sort of larger usually faculty member feedback-driven assessments of some kind. Maybe it's a short paper or a proposal, or it's a midterm or something like that. And then there's this big, heavy thing at the end of the course where the student is going to, again, check in with that faculty member and prove that they've learned something, or write something that indicates that they've learned something during the course of the semester. These check-ins with the faculty member are really heavy in terms of that faculty interaction. It takes a lot of work for him or her to really assess how the student's doing in the class.
And so do you want to go to the next one?
There's one other thing here. This is, and I think Lori really underscored the joy aspect of having her students discover something. And I think in a lot of cases, faculty members look at some of these assessments and evaluations as a chore. It's something that they have to get through. I've got to read all of these papers that my students have produced. I've got to grade all these exams. And we want to talk a little bit about bringing some more of that joy back into the classroom.
And so another model of an assessment plan that's really typical is, lots of small activities spread out throughout the course. But if you think about your instructional load, I mean, it's really hard to give robust formative feedback on every single activity or every single output that students produce in their course. So most of us will choose 2 or 3 moments or signature assignments where we're going to really come in and give advice and critique or analysis of student work. And so this is just another kind of model or visual to show you a technique that faculty typically use when putting their assessment plan together.
Right, getting to that 100%, but in a slightly different way. And Lisa pointed out she used an important phrase, I think, a couple of days ago when we were talking about this, and it's this opportunity for students to evidence their progress, for you to sort of check in with them and make sure that they are progressing. But this needn't necessarily be, each of these yellow bars or blue sort of activities or assignments needn't be something that the faculty member directly engages with the student on. It could be something that is a peer review or a self-assessment or something like that. So you're constantly doing these check-ins, but they're not necessarily heavy on the faculty member.
And increasingly, when you design online environments, those activities can take place through multiple media channels. They can take place in how students engage with the content of the course, as we saw with our iBook example. They can take place through the activities or the quizzes or the assignments that you give them, and they can also take place in live or social events in the course, and we'll share some examples of that very soon.
And Lori underscored this earlier in her keynote address. Feedback, feedback, feedback. Giving your students feedback is crucially important. So with these sort of introductory remarks, we're going to jump into the first topic. That last topic was topic 0, and this is topic 1. So this is a story, short story about what could be categorized as a failure, but I think is an opportunity for learning. A faculty member in the music humanities, in the music department, a music and humanities instructor, wanted to have her students provide evidence that they were learning critical thinking and that they were able to think and write creatively about music in her class. So she sought the permission from her chair to do an alternative type of exercise to the final exam, which is a concert report. It's a music festival proposal. So you're going to choose some artists that have meaning to you, and you're going to put these together, 6 to 10 artists, and put them together in a cohesive music festival. And that proposal is essentially a paper that you write and will be part of your final exam grade. She did not want to supplant the entire final exam, because students have an exam that they're normally given in music hum, but was able to get some permission to do this. In her class, she maybe had a somewhat weaker class than she'd normally had in other semesters, but she was going to try this out. She really wanted to experiment with this and have her students do something different than simply listen to the works, try to identify the artists, and do these sort of multiple choice fill in the blank and essay exams that they've done in the past. She's not giving up on this. Even though she found that it was not as successful the first time around she wanted it to be, she's going to give it a try again. She's going to try to make the process even more democratic, have the students choose what type of evaluation they want to use, and then proceed from there. She's also asking them to help her choose the topics that they want to have during the course of the semester that fall outside of the standard curriculum, and sort of democratizing this process. She hopes that she'll engage the students and allow them to find ways to express themselves within this class, which is pretty rote. It's pretty standard class within the core. So she's doing these experiments. The point I think that Lori made earlier is failure, right, is an option. It's often the only option. Trying this again and iterating on it is a really important part of what we do.
Right, and so I can share an example of that iterative design that takes place over many years from one of our courses in the master's degree in sustainability management. Now, this is one of, at the School of Continuing Education, we have graduate programs aimed at really interdisciplinary studies. So we typically have students who come from 30 or dozens of industries coming into the classroom to learn something new. And so in this program, we're preparing the future leaders of sustainability initiatives in business or nonprofit world. So in this class, green accounting the faculty member was like really afraid that the students would come and say, oh, accounting's really boring, there's nothing to learn here, it's a lot of math and charts and tables. And he wanted to design activities that help students see why they actually needed to be able to understand the financials that are reported out of companies. And so he wanted them to do an analyst report activity. And this activity was really simple. It's a traditional activity, right? He wanted them to examine the external financials that a company reports. And then he wanted them to write an analyst report with a thumbs up or a thumbs down investment decision, right? It sounds like a good activity to evidence students' understanding or interpretation of the reports. Well, what happened was that he did this, and he got papers from his students. It was a 4-page paper, and all of the papers spent about 3.5 pages summarizing the reports that they found, and then concluding with 1 or 2 sentences about whether to invest or not. And he was struck when he saw those student outputs, because he had no real evidence that students were able to examine multiple sources of financial data, make decisions based on that data, do any kind of critical analysis of that, and then articulate an underlying rationale for an investment decision. So he wanted to revise his assignment. In the second version of the assignment, which is launching this semester, the assignment is scoped completely differently. The assignment is scoped as, do some background research on this company that you've chosen, examine its financial reports, examine what its green financial reports are, examine what industry reports say about this company, and then look across all of those reports and identify 2 or 3 key decision metrics that will drive your investment decision. So the first part of the assignment is no longer a summary. In fact, he took summary out completely. He wanted them to identify their decision-making criteria, evidenced by the reports that they examined. And so that was the starting point of the assignment. And then part 2 was make your decision and then describe your rationale for making that decision. And so we're really excited to see what the students produce. We suspect that it will be a far more challenging activity, but it's an exciting transformation in how he scopes and directs the students in the assignment such that they actually evidence progress towards the goals that he put forth, while doing so with an activity that's aimed at their disciplinary practice, aimed at what they would do in the real world. We all want to know what company to invest in, and we want to invest with some kind of social responsibility around that. So that's an example of a change that faculty have made, or that we encourage faculty to make in their assignments.
This is, we're going to jump here for a second. This is another example that Lisa's going to talk us through, and I think this one is really cool because the students are involved in a process of developing an infographic. I think we see these all the time in publications, and coming up with good ones is a really, really challenging thing to do. Mm-hmm. And so going back to this idea of real world, sort of finding things for students to do that are sort of real world is hugely important, and I think this is a great example.
Right, and so for our populations, I mean, it is of critical importance that we design activities that students themselves see have direct impact or direct impact on their professional practice or their disciplinary practice. So this is a course this is one of my favorite courses that I wanted to talk about today. So in this course, it's a visualization of information course. And it's taught by Column 5 Media, the 3 founders of Column 5 Media. They're an award-winning infographic firm. I'm sure if once you know who they are, you'll recognize their work if you're an infographic nerd. And it's taught. The course is taught by those faculty members and some of the designers from their staff, from their firm, serving as teaching assistants. And so the design of the course was this. The first half of the course, students learned about the interdisciplinary framework that they needed to identify business stories, identify the data that represented the business stories, identify like the creative or design aspects that would help tell those stories, and learn basically about information design or information architecture in this space. And so a lot of the learning in the first half of the course was really focused on absorption. Do you understand this interdisciplinary discipline? Do you understand this context? And can you identify a business story and tell that story through data? And so the first assignment midway through the course was a creative brief. And a creative brief is the tool that a business person would use when working with a creative services design firm to produce an infographic. And so that was the first assignment. Students did this assignment, and then they had in the second half of the course, the work became team-driven. So it was a team-driven class in the second half. And this is where, I chose this example because when you think about how to design and assess collaborative activities, it's much, much more complicated than thinking about, an analyst report or, a
concert series.
A concert series or something that's just one individual output that students produce. So this is how we built out the activity sequence here. So students individually submitted their design brief or their creative brief to the faculty members. The faculty members juried those and picked 5 stories that were really interesting and that included really robust data sets that supported the business case that they wanted to tell. And so at that moment, faculty members, the faculty put the students into groups, and each group got a creative brief, and then the faculty members had their teaching assistants, designers in their firm, create an infographic for that creative brief, right? So this is the starting point of the activity. Students get a creative brief, and they get an infographic. But what the students didn't know was that the infographic was designed to have critical flaws in it. It had critical flaws in the business story, so there were discrepancies between what the creative brief said and what the infographic said, and it also had critical flaws in the actual design, the way the information was presented, the font, the color, et cetera, et cetera. And so the students didn't know that these flaws existed, but the students' task was to come in to a live webinar, a web session. The infographic design, the faculty, by the way, are in California. The firm is in California. And so every week, as the course met, we had a web conference on Adobe Connect where people got together and connected with each other. So in this live session, there was no lecture. People came in, and there were small groups, and each of those small groups met with the designer who produced the infographic, right? And their task was to lead a design discussion about the work. Are they satisfied with the work or not? Did it represent the story they wanted to tell? Is it beautiful and compelling? Could they use it to represent their business? These kinds of things. And as anybody who's worked with creatives know, that conversation is always really complicated and difficult, right? Because you have to do a critique that's not personal. Right? You have to point out flaws in somebody's artistry or somebody's work that might, if delivered poorly, be painful or end up in conflict, right? And so that was one of the goals of the course, to negotiate that conversation. So students came in to this session, they had to negotiate this conversation, and they didn't know there were any flaws. So as they were in this conversation, this second little visual here, this is what the web conference looked like. Students were in small groups, and as they were having the conversation with the designer, someone in the group was live scribing the conversation. The things that they were talking about, the problems that they identified, the problems that they solved. And then after the live session was over, this output for each group was submitted to the faculty member. And so the faculty member got the output, the written output of a collaborative critique. He looked at it. He talked to the designers and said, did the conversation go well? Was it interesting? And then in giving feedback to the students, they gave feedback on whether or not the students actually identified all the flaws. And what was really amazing and interesting when the faculty members looked at the student outputs here is that most of them identified flaws in the business story, but very few of them identified flaws in the visual design of the information. And so there was really robust real-time evidence to the faculty members for the next time that they teach their course that they need to go back to the design of the first half of the course and perhaps add in more content or interaction around thinking visually or understanding information visually. And so the example then, you know, when students, so to go back to how this played out, when faculty gave the grades to students, students were evaluated on whether or not they identified the flaws, you know, how the conversation went. And then you'd think that might be the end of the story, right? Because but if they got some things wrong, they should have a chance to get them right. So the course actually came back then to an individual assignment, which was another critique assignment, where students used the feedback that they got on the collaborative critique and then wrote an individual critique that better demonstrated or evidenced their progress towards the stated learning goals. So if they missed some things about design, they had to go back to the Deborah Wong book and look it up and identify it and then incorporate that into their next assignment. So that overall here, what we have in this collaborative activity is that although the activity mapped out with many milestones, the faculty only came in to one of those to give feedback. And the feedback that they gave then was informing the final or culminating critique assignment of the course. So we gave students a chance to get better with that.
There's a couple of different examples there of that iterative style of research, right? The students get to iterate on their work. The faculty member is iterating on the work that he's asking the students to do. And that's a really important thing to think about when you design assignments, which is what we've been talking about in this first section, is that assignment design element. But there's really no better way to get feedback than to simply ask. And so we're going to take a few minutes and talk about soliciting feedback from your students and ways of doing that. A couple of tools, but just a few things about questions and the way faculty members are doing it here at Columbia. I rolled out this the scroll at the top of the table here. You can see it runs the length of the table, and will probably fall off if it. Just to illustrate, this is an example of an actual evaluation that is given here at Columbia University in a large lecture class. This is asked of students at 3 points during the semester for them to do this. It's a lengthy survey, 11 pages, and students are asked to do it 3 times. Now, we don't propose this. We're going to talk a little bit about ways of doing this maybe slightly better. We're assuming, as we jump into this, that there's no perfect course, that asking questions of your students and getting feedback from them would be positive towards making changes. And then asking them explicitly is an element to do that. Now, you want to be sure that you're sort of focusing at the right level, because these mid-semester evaluations are different than course evaluations. Everyone has a course evaluation. They look at future impact on students who are going to take the course in another semester. They ask broad questions about the course experience. They often do address efficacy, but in some cases they ask opinions about enjoyment. Did you enjoy the class? We're looking at ways here of asking targeted questions to implement change in a course as it happens. Some faculty members look at their syllabus as a contract with their students. It's immutable and it will not change during the course of the semester. And I think that that's an expectation that you can set with your students, and it's perfectly reasonable. Some faculty members do want to sort of make these mid-semester course corrections and focus on one little element in the class. So why is it important? You're asking the students to reinvest in the course. It allows the teacher to suit the current students' needs much better during this current semester, and it gives the students often an anonymous outlet, right, to productively voice their concerns. This is, that's an important aspect of it, is it should be productive. And in order to get an idea of productive, we'll look at some good questions after we look at some types of questions. This is the Likert scale, Old Faithful. It's easy for students to identify with that scale from effective to not effective, to then go through and quickly identify the effectiveness of many, many elements within the course. Multiple choice. You know, which one was the most effective? And the students can sort of choose one of those elements, and you can continue to focus on that, or maybe improve the efficacy of the things that they did not identify. There are open-ended questions as well. In this case, it's a list. This is beneficial because the instructor may not have identified all of the elements of the course in those other types of questions. So this is where the student might talk about availability or the sound system or something that is really sort of hindering their ability to learn in the classroom, and identify new things that maybe the instructor didn't think about in terms of effectiveness. So all these different types of questions, there clearly are many, many, many more, and not to be too pedantic about it, but there they are. There are some examples, here are some examples of good and bad questions. Now the first one, what do you like or dislike about this course? It's going towards opinion, not towards efficacy. Honestly, we find this question asked quite often, and we would suggest a change there. The second one, the lectures and the reading helped me learn in this course. Do you agree or disagree? Or a Likert scale maybe. How strongly do you agree or disagree with that? I think it's going towards efficacy, but it's conflating two elements. So be sure to keep them separate so that you're able to get good data and identify what is helping students and what is not helping students. This next question here, what is helping you learn in the course? This probably would be an open-ended question where the students can give you some feedback about what is really effective for them. Even if a student has a negative opinion of the course, is forcing them to identify one positive element. It's normalizing everyone sort of in the positive. And then it's allowing you to begin, again, to focus on those elements that are most effective for students or identify things that you didn't even know about that really was the most effective things for students and their learning. So maybe you don't really focus on the discussion board, or you don't know that the students are keeping a Google Doc of the lecture notes. If somebody says, I really like the Google Doc, and you have no idea what it is, that would be an interesting thing to know. This is actually an example from a literature humanities instructor whose students built their own study guide for the exam, and he only learned about it after the exam. He read it and he thought it was great, and he uses it in subsequent semesters with the students' permission. And then this last one is, if there's something you could change, how would you change it? So it's identifying the negative. There may be a negative element in the class that the students have identified, but it's asking them to come up with a solution. So it may be mundane things like the room is too hot, as it is in here today. So how would you change it? I'd cool it off. All right, but it may also force them to identify things that you hadn't thought about that you may in fact need to change in the class. And so when you're soliciting feedback, we have a couple of, just like we did with this little section in the middle here, keep it short. A handful of questions that focus on the thing that you really want to get done is the important thing to do. Choose that focus. Are you doing something new in the class? Is there something that you're really trying out and you want to determine whether it's working or not so that you can then iterate that design? It's an important aspect to it. And find a sweet spot between that really broad course evaluation and a really narrow question about assignment 2. And try to find a sweet spot in the middle where you can get information that's useful to you and your students. Anything to say about that? Mm-hmm. No? Okay.
Yeah, that was great.
All right. Now, sort of the meatier sort of end to the presentation. We'll talk a little bit about student data. So we talked a little bit about designing your assignments and a little bit about soliciting direct feedback from students. But we can also nowadays look at the way that students behave within a course system. It's the Big Brother feature in a lot of the course management systems. This is the phrase that I hear time and again when I sit down with faculty members and we talk about the fact that you can turn on tracking. We've had this for about 13 years at Columbia. Old CourseWorks did that. New CourseWorks does it as well, if you turn it on. The wiki systems that we use, the blog systems that we use, and the things that the folks at Continuing Education are developing, it's incredible. So we let folks know about this from time to time, but we don't focus on it too much unless a faculty member is interested in evaluating the data that swirls around their class.
And I would say as a longtime teacher myself, I was in ESL for, gosh, over a decade, and what I loved most about teaching was not telling students the difference between the past and the past perfect, right? That can be like really boring. But watching them reach the aha moment when they really understood it and they internalized it. And then thinking about all of my students and wondering why some of them reached the aha moment in week 3, but other ones weren't getting to the aha moment. And what could I do as the course architect or the instructor? What could I do to help everybody get to that aha moment by the time they left my course? And so I was always really desperate for data because I wanted to get insight into how they learned, what they did, how much practice they spent, and then how they thought about that practice or planned their own study. And so I don't see all this, the emergence of big data as Big Brother. I'm really excited about it because it's the first time in history that I'm able to examine scientifically with something real, how students behave in a learning environment. And I hope that I can learn something about effective teaching and learning or effective pedagogy in that space. So, you know, that's why I get really excited about the stuff that we're about to talk about.
And that's that developing methods for success within a course here. But you can use very simple data in a course website. So this is a picture of a English wiki that's going on right now. I've obscured the names to protect the innocent. But it's a Beowulf translation wiki, and the students are in the thick of it right now. Now, someone made 21 edits in the wiki this week. Someone else made 2 edits. I'm not hanging any meaning on that necessarily, but you get an idea of, you know, someone sort of either experimenting or their punctuation maybe isn't so great and they're going in and fixing their commas and semicolons. Hence the 21 edits. And maybe somebody who's editing a couple of times is doing it in a very concise and meaningful way. But you just get an idea of who is engaged in this, who's coming in and doing things. And you can go into each of those students and see when they're doing it. So you know, this student's doing it at 3 o'clock in the morning the day before class. This student is doing it 5 times over the course of the week and really sort of spreading it out. So these are very simple data. Again, another very simple piece of data, recap from a discussion board in a science course. It looks like the instructor was asking the students to post 10 times during the course of the semester, right? Because the first column shows a number of 10 posts in the discussion boards. But you notice here that a lot of the students didn't read the discussion board posts. Some read none of them. The instructor read many of them, but not all of them. So it's an interesting sort of snapshot of what happened over the course of the semester there. Another sort of big picture thing, again, I'm not saying that this has any great meaning. This is a large chemistry course. We see that on the first day of class, 2,000 files get downloaded from the course website. Of the 210 students in the class, everybody averaged 10. We see consistent sort of behavior over the course of the semester. You can sort of see the weekend dips. You can see the break maybe that we took in November. And then there's a spike there at the end when the students sort of hit the study time for the final.
Dan, a quick question on
sure.
that. So, you know, say a faculty member gets this beautiful chart and notices that the syllabus has been downloaded 2,000 times. What meaning is he or she supposed to extract from that?
Some instructors, so this is an example of lecture 23. All right, this was downloaded by 142 people in the class out of 210. Now this instructor sort of sees this as an opportunity. He can look at the dates and the times when this happens as well. He sees this as an opportunity to see when students downloaded the thing initially and when they go back for the corrected version. All right, so he's able to sort of see students downloaded the first version of it 142 times. People downloaded the other one 200 times. That is getting the traction that I need, and students need to have that updated presentation in order to be able to properly study. So again, it's not hanging too much on it, but a report like this might be interesting to that instructor. Here's another one around the midterms and the final. These are the numbers of times that the practice examinations were accessed and when by the students. So he offers them in a 5-day period at each of these times, and you can see that activity over the course of those times. And you know, 210 students are hitting the exam around 450 times. So that means that everybody's going once or twice. And again, he can see who did or did not participate in that.
And so with this, all of the information that these platforms are collecting, then it provides us as instructors to engage in evidence-driven practice. I mean, if platforms expose the evidence or expose the behavior of students, how could we ignore it? I mean, we have to look at it and then think critically about our instructional practice. Things we might want to change or things we might want to enhance or plus or continue doing. We might also examine our course design itself, what things worked, what things didn't work, what students seem to be engaged with, what they're not engaged with. And so in the work that we're doing at SCE, as I mentioned, we're really interested at defining effective pedagogy and practice at the intersection of technology, design, and media. And we have a growing media production team aimed at doing that. And so in all of our online courses, we support flipped designs to some extent, where we pre-produce media elements that could be things like lectures or interviews or simulations or on-location pieces. And we watch whether or not students actually watch those videos that we've produced. Our media producer, Melanie Hibbert, is in the audience today. She spends a lot of time thinking critically about whether or not it's worth it to produce all of these media pieces. Does the student engagement with the media affect or lead to better outcomes in the course? Does it help students reach the course goals, in other words? And so we're starting to look at things like, well, how many times does somebody watch the video? If we have 40 students in the class and we have the one video watched 300 times, then something's going on with that video. We don't know what just by looking at the analytics, but there's something interesting happening there. Or if we have lots of 20-minute, 30-minute lectures that our engagement metrics say are not being watched, that most students watch only 40% of the 20-minute lecture, and yet everybody's getting an A in the class, then it begs some questions about what that media is and how powerfully it affects student learning. And so Melanie is a doctoral candidate at Teachers College and is, just now conceptualizing her dissertation on this exact area of inquiry, because it's really interesting. Everybody's talking about producing these lectures and putting them up, but let's start talking about whether or not those lectures are actually leading to meaningful learning and meaningful engagement. And so we're really excited about her research, and I encourage you to read it when it comes out too. It's a really interesting thing. So we try in everything we do to look at the metrics. We also have, as a component of all of our online courses, real-time web conferences that we host generally every week using Adobe Connect. How many of you guys have been in the real-time web conferences on GoToMeeting, WebEx, Adobe Connect? Most everyone in the class. And so we all then have experienced, especially if we go to marketing webinars, death by webinar, where one person blah, blah, blah talks, and that you find yourself reading your email and checking Twitter or whatever else. So we are very, very interested in designing live sessions where there is a robust visual experience for students to keep them engaged and a robust interactive experience. And so we have Michael Fleming, our live events manager, who is unable to be here today, but someone on staff dedicated to defining this and helping faculty do this. And in this image here, I share a sample of what the conference space looks like. This was from the infographics course. So clearly they looked at lots of infographics in this session and critiqued them together. They had a whiteboard, they highlighted things together, and the conversation was really robust through these channels. There are also lots of polls that students take. Interactive moments every 5 to 7 minutes, and the data or the results of those polls are exposed in real time so that faculty members can see, oh yeah, people are listening to me in my webinar, and by the way, only 70% got the answer right. I thought everyone would have got the answer right. What should I do? Should I go back and review? Should I offer an office hour? Should I send my TA to do some help in the chat? I mean, looking at the data in real time really informs or drives the lecture delivery itself. And so this is really hard for most faculty to do. It's hard for everybody to do, right? And the learning curve to teach in these types of, in these new media spaces is really difficult. And so what we do with faculty, we clearly, train them on how to use the platform at the most basic level, but really what we do is we've architected our infrastructure such that in every single session, there's a tech support and pedagogy support. So in every single session, after the session, faculty get a live session participation report that shows not only who attended, when they came, how many people talked in the chat, etc., but also identifies 1 or 2 really great things that they did, super successful polls or back channel chat conversations, and 1 or 2 things that they might want to do the next time. And then each time we have a live session, we have a pre-flight planning meeting with the facilitators and the faculty and our staff, and we plan for that because we really want that live moment to be a powerful space where students can connect with each other, connect with their content, connect with the faculty, and kind of simulate as best we can, or perhaps expand, what they would have if they were here on campus sitting in one of our rooms.
Can we jump right to the cliffhanger?
Yep. So,
all right. So, Sorry.
Sorry. We're jumping to the cliffhanger. Okay, so there's a really interesting question out there when you think about how to observe collaborative activities and online spaces, right? Because we can observe through instructional design how students interact at any given milestone of an assignment. Those were the examples we gave a little bit earlier. But when we look at discussions that take place in online platforms, they look like this, more or less. There's an image, there's an avatar, somebody says something, somebody comments, and faculty members, if they design forums into their course, they read screens and screens and screens, like these scrolls of text that students produce. And it's really, really hard for a faculty member or facilitator to read those walls of text and answer the basic instructional questions about their course. Are students on topic or not? Are they citing references or sources from the course? To what extent are they bringing in their disciplinary knowledge or their professional practice? What are the topics they're discussing? How are they networking together? What's the output of these conversations? Do these conversations evidence progress towards my learning goals? I mean, these are really important questions to ask, but they're really hard to see here. And so I'm going to give you a teaser glimpse, and I mean teaser in every sense, into a 2-year research project that Dr. Marnie Baker-Stein, who's our Senior Associate Dean of Curriculum and Instruction, has been the PI on in collaboration with Pearson for several years. And in this research project, we are attempting to represent the content maps of the course, the social networking maps of the course, and throwing them into graphical representations to understand what is social knowledge networking in the digital space. How do students use the content? How do they interact with each other? How do they construct new content and meaning? And what is really happening in these online spaces? And so, and then, you know, can we identify profiles of learners or dashboard views of data that will help faculty members see into these really robust collaborative social moments of their course? It's in the future, but these are things that we're starting to look at now. So our context for my example before I show you that is that this is for a master's degree program in the information and knowledge strategy domain. It's an emerging discipline. We have students from a dozen industries. 30% of them already have master's degrees or PhDs. They're all seeking to define an emerging discipline, and that discipline itself is not really well defined, right? It's emerging and it's very interdisciplinary by nature. And so in that program, students come to campus 3 times. They have intensive residencies right here in Faculty House, and they, and in between those residencies, they complete their coursework online. And so much of the coursework or the social interaction happens in the forum, in spaces that look like this. And we started examining deeply what's actually happening here and starting to you know, come up with some theories about it. So in this activity that I'm going to show you, it's one activity in one course, and the prompt for students was to discuss how they might use data analytics to drive business decisions in their own company. This is a course on data analytics taught by Jeannie Harris at Accenture, HBR author who's quite renowned in her field. And so here is a representation, a visual representation of the content and the networking in one student's post. Bam. Ta-da! This is one student who came to the forum, authored the primary post, and introduced 74 key concepts. 74 key concepts. About 20% of the concepts that she introduced were directly from the course materials that she was exposed to in the course. And so to get to this graph, without getting into all the details, let me just tell you that we put in all of the texts of the course into a graph database, and we put in all of the student interactions into the database, and now we're mapping them, and we're seeing topic overlay by participant. So Renlit, they all have fairy names. We have no idea who these students are. They're all scrubbed, they're fairy names. Renlit starts the conversation. These are the topics that she introduces. Now, look up in the left corner. Another student comes in, Laurette, and Laurette brings to the conversation 5 new topics. Only about 1% of those come from the textbook. Now look in the upper right. Manaya comes in. She introduces 4 topics. Again, 1% of which come from the textbook. And then Chakata comes in down at the bottom, and Alaket comes down again. And we start to notice a pattern. We start to notice that students, when they come into the forum, they're talking about 4 or 5 concepts that were originally introduced, and then they're introducing more from their disciplinary practice. And that's what you would expect in this conversation, which was really an activity designed for students to say how they might drive business decisions, right? But then we start to see really interesting things, and this is the cliffhanger for you. We see Visca coming in at the bottom. And Visca, she adds content, as you see. But none of that content is actually related to the conversation or to the textbooks. And Visca, if you look at her over time, you notice that this is her pattern. This is what she always does. She always comes in at the end of conversations. She's valuable. Some might call her a social lubricant. You know, she participates, and she gets A's in the class because she's participating. But the degree to which she is directly impacting the social knowledge networking of the course is up for examination. And it's really an exciting question or proposition that for the first time ever, we are now able, using these big data tools and these graph visualizations, to start to see directly into the types of learning and the types of networking that students are engaging in the online spaces. And so in the next year or so, Marnie is going to publish some of her work, and she's been going around talking about it a lot. And so keep your eyes out for that as well. I think that's where the future is heading.
It should be noted that Renlet works in the wine industry, so that's hence all those references. It's
Oh, yes. Yes, she does. So at SCE, students are not talking about alcohol. They're really talking about data and analysis and et cetera. That was what the course was about. And we saw this, faculty saw this as a very successful discussion. And it was, in fact. It did exactly what it meant to do. Question?
Yeah.
Well, one question I ask is why Renlet is such a star and has 74 pieces of information. Once somebody puts a lot of information out there, they feel it's redundant to add.
So the question is, why is Renlet a star?
Why is Renlet a star? That's a great question. And you know why? Because she was the first person to post. And we see...
It's just serendipitous that she did go...
This happens all the time.
Right. This behavior, when you start looking at it, you see it all the time. The first person to post in a forum has the floor, and then discussions typically evolve around that. In this particular assignment, in other spaces, in other forum discussions, everybody got an opportunity to post their primary post. So, you know, you can design the activity such that everyone posts as a primary post, but it begs this question about the platform itself. Why can't we have a platform where people post their first response and no one can see it yet? No one can see it yet because you want to equalize or democratize the field such that on Thursday night at 10 o'clock, boom, the whole forum opens, and that students navigate into the forum perhaps through a tag cloud, perhaps through some other visualization versus that long linear line of text.
So, but,
because in the MOOCs with 3,000 people, this happens all the time, and this long tail thing disenfranchises 2/3 of the class, which is why there's a high dropout rate.
Yes, it does.
Because only the first third gets seen or read by anybody.
even if it's the first third that get seen or read in a MOOC. Just to what you just mentioned a moment ago, I had an instructor in the other day who actually is doing this. He's using a moderated discussion board. So he's having the students all post, and then he's moderating them all out at the due time, and then the students can then have at each other in their comments. So there are ways of doing this sort of thing, but when you look at the data, it's just interesting that we get this big bang at the beginning, and then everything else just sort of like trickles in.
And I think what's really interesting here, and again, this is just one small snippet of raw data that really is, this is a research project that's been going on 2 years. And we don't know yet the answers to this, but what a fabulous and interesting research context to figure out how to do powerful and effective or democratized social knowledge networking at the scale of the world. It's a transformative idea. And if we can get to some understandings about that, you could see a real shift in the MOOCs such that they themselves become more social by design. And that's an exciting proposition in my view.
We'll go up front here. Yeah.
How are you doing the topic tagging? Is that automatic or?
This is very labor intensive from what I understand.
Yeah, it's very labor intensive, and I don't have all of the super detailed responses to that. I know that our partners at Pearson, there's a whole research team at Pearson devoted to this too, and we're using Aurelius to data model out the sets. They're linked up with other concept databases, and I'm really sorry that I don't have more specific details that will be coming out in the research that we start to publish. But it is very labor intensive. I can tell you that it's very labor intensive at this stage to code and to hand code and to machine code every single student output. That's why it's been taking 2 years. But
right.
we have a really great set that we'll start to publish on soon.
And that's for sort of that natural language processing is being done by humans, right? And it's just being sort of coded. Yeah. There are systems, though, like MediaThread, which has been spoken about in other sessions, where the interactions between people and the things that they're quoting, or the objects, the text, the images, the videos that they're working with, are visualizable in a very sort of quick and easy way. So again, this is Horizon in some ways, but there will be a time when you'll be able to sort of go to your discussion board and get some sort of graph that would visualize
and
it.
I think many of the major LMS players out there, the platforms, are really, really starting to work on how they can expose these types of data to help faculty members teach better in this space. And I think in the next few years we'll start to see some really exciting features come out that show dashboard views of student performance, or perhaps profile behaviors, perhaps what do you call that? The recommendation engines that connect people together who might talk about the same things again and again, or recommend content that may be of interest. I think it's a really exciting time to be in this space.
We will close it there, but we're going to stay up here. And so if you have questions, come on up and talk with us.